I think we have agitated Russia to the point by expanding NATO. We just keep adding countries closer and closer to their backyard. The situation in Ukraine, we also toppled their government in 2014. The United States did.
Thomas Massie recently appeared on Theo Von's podcast to talk about the catastrophe that is U.S. involvement in Ukraine, why Ukraine first is America last, the destructive nature of the military-industrial complex, and why we were drawn into that conflict in the first place. So let's watch and let's react. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
It's a weird amalgamation of combined interests. There's a military-industrial complex that is all in for everything AIPAC is for. And, and before I banned AIPAC from my office, we used to have conversations that would go something like this. Oh, you should be for the foreign aid that goes to Israel because it all comes back to the United States in the form of military spending. We're buying it all from American contractors. And I'd be like, no, that's not a convincing argument to me.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't even know what it's about, but it seems like bullshit to me. How does America make money off of war, right? Like, I get that, you know, we sell things, this and that, but how is that such a business, right? You know, it's like, how do we let this happen?
Well, the answer is America doesn't make money off of war. A few people in America do make money off of war, and they make a lot of money off of war. So they want the music to keep going. They don't want the music to stop.
Right.
And as soon as, you know, Biden was serious about getting out of Afghanistan and did get us out of Afghanistan, and we were spending, by the way, we were still spending $50 billion a year in Afghanistan after 20 years. As soon as he got us out of there, guess what? We start spending an average of $50 billion a year in Ukraine.
What a coincidence, right? They just replaced one prolonged conflict, a proxy war, with another. As Julian Assange said, they don't want a successful war, they want an endless war. That's one of the greatest things he said, and one of the greatest lessons I think we learned from Afghanistan, but you can see how it applies to so many other conflicts. And Massey's totally right. This is an industry that thrives off death. This industry would not exist if the U.S. doesn't get involved in empire building across the sea, you know, military bases in all corners of the world, and get into conflicts like you just saw in Iran. It just wouldn't happen. There wouldn't be enough support for it. But because the war regime marches on and gets involved in all these new theaters over time, there are people that profit from it. And the military-industrial complex pushes it partially to profit them. And guess what? The central banks benefit too, because they print money out of thin air, which depreciates the value of our currency, creates inflation, and keeps this financed. So that's exactly what happens.
And now that that's winding down, guess what? This thing in Iran is heating up.
Exactly.
And regardless of whether our troops engage directly, those are all American munitions. And those stocks are, you know, the people who run those companies are excited that now, you know, as soon as we deplete our stockpiles, we're going to have to fill them back up. Like, it's not like they're holding a bunch of inventory, but the U.S. government does. Those are ostensibly, those are weapons that are supposed to defend us that are now being used. And so they know we'll buy them back. And I have this theory that there's about $50 billion a year of things that need to get blown up and replaced in order for that segment of the economy to stay healthy.
Wow. Yeah, so they've just decided to fund these things, and including the $1 trillion Pentagon budget, which Hegseth boasted about, which is about $100 billion more than the top most expensive Biden Pentagon budget. They just decide to throw this money into empire building. They call it national defense, but really it is, you know, oligarchic offense is really what it is. And these wars that are brought about just for the sake of lining the pockets of these military contractors. And guess what happens? Those military contractors often then go into government, make sure that the regulatory environment is such to allow these profits to continue. Then they go back to the private sector and, you know, benefit more. This is called the revolving door effect. And it's a real tragedy. It really is an engine of bloodshed across the sea, which also has ramifications on the American people.
Then there was a real push to get out of Ukraine, to quit spending money there. And we almost succeeded. Like I said before, the tie-breaking vote was Mike Johnson. The bill passed by just one vote. And a lot of times the speaker doesn't even vote, but he voted in that case to make sure that Ukraine got that money.
Because of course he did. Mike Johnson is part of the regime that wants to keep this funding. Despite all the rhetoric in his, candidacy per se for the speakership, before he became the speaker, he was actually inclined less to support Ukraine than he is now. Well, the military-industrial complex got its claws into him, like happens so much. And that's true of basically all the leadership of the Republican Party for my entire lifetime, certainly with Paul Ryan and John Boehner and Denny Hastert and all of these people.
But isn't it, it's also, I think it's admirable that a guy is willing to go against their own party's interests, right? Like that part to me seems like a part of like, you know what I'm saying? Like not just to be in line all the time with everything.
Well, that could be me. Right, sometimes, right?
Right, that's what I'm saying. Oh, yeah. Totally. Yeah, so that's what I think that's a little bit of the thing I don't get about some of this stuff whenever we talk about Mike Johnson is like, if he, like, there's admiration in going against, like, just what your party's going to do, right?
Right. If you're staying true to your party's principles, I think it's admirable. But when you're betraying your party's principles, I don't think it is, because you've campaigned on one thing and now you're doing something different.
Got it.
Yeah, generally true. I mean, it's very true to see that Republicans campaign like they're Ron Paul and then they govern like they're John McCain. That's a quote from my friend Clinton Russell, but I think there's so much truth in it. And what Massie said, I mostly agree. If your party has legitimate principles, virtuous principles, true principles, then yeah, defending them is a good thing. I can't say that all the Republican Party principles is a good thing, but certainly they campaign in a different way than they govern. We've seen that time and time again. It's true with Democrats too. When they campaign as non-interventionists, they get in office and create all these new wars. You saw that especially with Obama, expanding the wars in the Middle East greatly, getting involved in Libya, escalating war in Syria, essentially starting that, getting involved in Yemen. And, all of these different wars are never to the benefit of the people. And the people vote for an entity that just doesn't exist once they get into office. They just start wars.
And the reality is the speaker has so much power up there. He's in training dozens of more people who rely on him to get reelected. And by the way, the lobbyists, in addition to focusing on the executive branch, they spend a lot of their effort on on just the speaker and the speaker's office.
What do you think's kept us in Ukraine so long? I mean, obviously, we want to be supportive of people that are struggling, right? We want to help out people. It feels like as an American, especially, that's part of like our creed, and what you feel in your heart is like if you can be helpful to another group, right? So I certainly see that as something that we want to keep involved in foreign conflicts, even though a lot of times I'm like, why are we involved in these conflicts over there? What is it, I think, that I don't understand maybe about or about Russia and Ukraine? Or do you think that that's part of just the military industrial tab that we have to fill?
I think we have agitated Russia to the point by expanding NATO. We just keep adding countries closer and closer to their backyard that are in a military alliance with us. And the situation in Ukraine, we also toppled their government in 2014. The United States did.
We did?
Yeah.
Bring that up.
Yeah, bring that up.
Yeah, a lot of people don't even know that. That's the Maidan coup, but Massie's exactly right. Not only did the U.S. overthrow their government, the democratically elected Yanukovych government, for all this talk of being pro-democracy and supporting Ukraine, the U.S. toppled that government. You had an intercepted call between Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Pyatt talking about who had to be part of this provisional government that actually leaked. So it's absolutely true. We know that USAID poured in money during the winter of 2014 to keep those protests going that were the catalyst for that revolution. They called it the Revolution of Dignity, but it was actually the Revolution of Duplicity. And he also talked about the different waves of NATO expansion that's happened throughout time, essentially 5 different ways. And, oh yeah, they also put missiles on the border, essentially, of Russia that were Aegis missiles. You can put a nuclear warhead on a Tomahawk missile. They have offensive purposes. So how would we feel if Russia did that in Mexico? And, oh yeah, by the way, we're going to pledge that Mexico is going to join our military alliance, which isn't defensive, by the way. If people think NATO is a defensive alliance, point them to the Balkans or Afghanistan or Libya. Those are not defensive actions. So Massie's totally right here.
You can see that the government changed there, and we had our hands all over that.
Let me see. In 2014, Ukraine experienced a period of intense political upheaval, culminating in the removal of President Viktor Yanukovych. The event, often referred to as the Revolution of Dignity or Euromaidan, involved widespread protests against Yanukovych's policies, particularly his decision to reject a trade agreement with the European Union in favor of closer ties with Russia. So we didn't want him to have closer ties with Russia, so we overthrew them?
Yeah, I mean, we went in and fomented those protests. Our CIA did, our State Department, Victoria Nuland was part of that.
Yes,
so this was just another thing. You think we started laying the seeds in advance to get to this point?
Yeah, I don't think it would have ever happened if we weren't involved.
So true. And William Burns, who was the CIA director under Biden, actually was the ambassador to Ukraine back during the Bush years, and he sent a memo to Condoleezza Rice saying, hey, all the factions in Russia, they disagree on many things, but one thing they agree on is that adding Ukraine to NATO is the reddest of red lines. And the U.S. government kept flirting with that over and over and over time. That happened in the Bucharest summit at the end of George W. Bush's administration when he said, NATO has to add Ukraine and Georgia. And Obama, Kamala Harris said it. There's been this constant push to add Ukraine to NATO, and that is what Russia can't accept. So all these things went into the antagonism that was the United States and funneled and fueled this proxy war in Ukraine. And by the way, the United States negotiated in bad faith in the Minsk II agreement too in 2015, where Ukraine was supposed to provide political autonomy to the Donbas provinces. And by the way, Yanukovych didn't necessarily want close ties to Russia. He just wanted neutrality. So yeah, that's what they mean by closer ties. He wasn't even explicitly pro-Russian. He just didn't want to get into a war with Russia, which did happen in 2014 also. So this war started in 2014.
In fomenting this and then talking about bringing them into NATO after we poked Putin in the eye here.
Yeah.
And the whole point was just to get to a war to help fill out the tab, you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a part of it. Like that's sort of Massie's law. There has to be $50 billion of stuff that gets blown up that is made by American military industrial complex in order to keep them going.
That's right. No matter what they've decided to spend it, it's not a question of whether or not they'll spend it. It's just where they spend it. That's exactly right. I'm going to go with that. Massie's law. And
if it's not, they'll just spend more effort in making that happen.
Got it.
Yeah.
Rather than go out of business.
Yeah. Oh, I think once you get used to something, you get used to it.
Oh, here's the thing I was going to say before. When we got close to not funding Ukraine under Mike Johnson, the Biden administration sent a letter to Congress, to each of us. Everybody in Congress got one of these letters, listing all the states who had, they call it the defense industrial base now because military industrial complex has a bad connotation.
You need a rebranding.
Yeah. So
as it should have a bad connotation.
DIB, the defense industrial base. They showed how almost every state in the union benefits from military spending and why you should, and that was their argument. Not that there was some noble cause or to help out a struggling group of people, like you said. The argument that the Biden administration was making was it was in congressmen's the financial best interests of their districts in order to vote for this bill.
It's all part of the war propaganda. This is how it goes. This is, pro-democracy. This is going to help your constituents. Well, yeah, if your constituents are filled with people that are on the boards of Lockheed Martin and Raytheon and Boeing, that's who it'll help. So, yeah, I'm totally with Massie here. This is all a scheme. It's always been a scheme. This is not the first time it's been a scheme.
So at least now they're just saying it's a business.
Yeah, right. Give them an A for honesty. Yeah.
They're at least saying,
feed the machine.
Yeah, feed the machine. But doesn't that also cost human lives? Like if our military has to get involved?
It does. That's the these are, now they're supposedly sanitary wars where our kids don't have to die. But I think it's disgusting when we've had members of the Senate at least say that this is great. We're grinding down Russia's military capability, and we don't have to spill any of our blood.
That's true. Lindsey Graham said this is the best money America's ever spent because we're fighting against the Russians and it's not our men doing it. Well, I think that is a dreadful mentality. That's a sick and twisted mentality.
But I mean, how perverted is that? That you're grinding up Ukrainians' bodies in order to grind up Russian bodies, and that somehow that's in the best interest of the United States. I'll give, I don't want to say his name, but I'll give that senator credit for being honest, at least. But
yeah, and in 2014, he and John McCain were in Ukraine, proudly appearing in PR stunts with, Ukrainian soldiers saying, this is going to be the year for offense against Russia. They were already fanning these flames way back then. It's always catastrophic. And what this does is it supports slavery. This encourages Zelensky to expand his conscription mandates, where you see old men being plucked off the streets, because there's a dying generation of men now in Ukraine that have perished in this fruitless war, where Russia's occupied the Donbass for the vast majority of this conflict and still has like about 90%. It doesn't look like that's changing, by the way. So yeah, this is horrendous.
I think it's disgusting.
Yeah, I mean, I think we just have so much capability to manipulate so many situations, and I don't understand, actually, it's silly to say I don't understand anymore if I believe that part of the military-industrial complex or the defense
industrial base
needs to keep collecting. It makes sense. It's a business. Everything that's one of the downsides of capitalism, I guess. In a weird way, is that everything kind of can become a business. Even like the beauties of trying to be supportive of other countries or trying to help out people.
Well, the only thing I would say is that if it were truly capitalist and we wouldn't have this intrusive empire-building government, there'd be no market for this. People don't pay for that service of waging war against other nations voluntarily. That money has to be seized from Americans through coercive methods like taxation and inflation. There simply wouldn't be a Boeing or a Raytheon or a Lockheed Martin or a Northrop Grumman in a world where that phenomenon and that cycle of violence and the incentives behind it existed. And it didn't exist prior to the outbreak of the military-industrial complex, which Dwight D. Eisenhower warned of. And then, he did stuff like coup the government of Iran. And we're seeing the bad fruits of that, and ironically expand despite the fact that he was the one that gave that warning in a prominent speech.
And that's in addition to the $1 trillion a year we're now spending on the military in the United States. That's about what Congress allocates. And this is all catching up to us, because now the interest that we're paying is about $1 trillion a year. So because we've engaged for 2 or 3 decades in all of these overseas wars, we've racked up such a tab that we're paying more in interest than, there you go, than we are in the military industrial complex. And on the screen there, it says $849 billion. Don't forget, there's another $100 billion in the big, beautiful bill that they snuck in there, and they sneak in another $50 billion somewhere else. So it's about.
Yeah, he's right about that. Both Trump and Hegseth boasted about the fact that the Pentagon's budget will be over $1 trillion. And he's right about the interest on the national debt, which is now $37 trillion in debt. I think that's from the Treasury admitting this. And the interest payments are $1 trillion. There's no hope to repay this debt. It's just insane. It's not sustainable. It cannot be confronted unless we curtail the entitlement state, the military-industrial complex, and the warfare state, and none of these expenditures on military help anything.
Not $1 trillion, but look up the interest on the debt now too. The
interest on the debt, it matches our GDP right now.
The interest,
I think it's about 35 trillion a year is our.
That's the debt, but the interest on the debt matches how much we spend on all of our defense. It's $1 trillion. If you look up interest, what's the interest on the debt last year?
That's insane. Do you think that we should have a war with Iran? I know you and Ro Khanna, which is so crazy that he was here the other day and then here you are, because it was just like, what are the odds? Like,
right. And no, we didn't plan that because we didn't know Israel was going to bomb Iran, and that.
Oh no, a month ago I knew that you were probably going to come. We've been talking about it, but then he and I just decided like 5 days ago. So it was just crazy before I even knew that the bill that you guys had put that together. He said that made it so that there had to be a 15-day moratorium before you went to war. Is that correct? Can you explain it to me?
No, that we can get a vote within 15 days of this bill being introduced, unless Speaker Johnson does something sneaky. So there's a law that says if Ro Khanna and I, in which we did, introduce this war powers resolution, the law says that Speaker Johnson needs to bring this to the floor for a vote if the committee doesn't act on it. And
yeah, so what they were trying to do is curtail the president from being able to just unilaterally, like a 17th century king, the English system king, which the founders were trying to get away from, to just impose war at will. And this would apply to any U.S. president, not just Trump. But presidents don't exactly care about what the Constitution says about who needs to declare war. By the way, spoiler, it's Congress. It's not the president. And this is a bipartisan malignment upon the Constitution. It's not just Trump. Obama did this. George W. Bush did this. Clinton did this. Almost every U.S. president did this. Reagan invaded Grenada. And a war hasn't been declared as it constitutionally should since World War II. So this would go a long way to disincentivize the president from using those type of powers. And what did we just see in Iran? We saw that bombing expedition violate the intended structure through which the founders wanted the presidency and war powers to operate. So I would have been all for this. Congrats to Ro Khanna for going along with it. Ro Khanna isn't great on other issues related to foreign policy. He wants to fund Ukraine. But on this, I have to give him props. That's what we should do. If we're interested in single issues, pushing people more toward liberty, that should be celebrated. So props to him and Massie.
The committee's not going to act on it. By the way, I introduced this on Tuesday, and it's just been a few days. We have 37 co-sponsors already. Now, whether you think we should be engaged in a war with Iran or not, I would hope that your listeners understand that or agree that it's important that their members of Congress vote on whether that happens or not.
Yeah.
And before, just to give you some historical perspective, before George Bush Sr. attacked Iraq, there was a vote of Congress to do that. It wasn't a declaration of war. It was to authorize use of military force. Before George Bush Jr. went into Afghanistan, there was a vote of Congress. And before we went into Iraq, again, there was a vote of Congress.
So it's gotten worse even since then, when at least Congress had votes on this. And trust me, the AUMF was terrible. It wasn't a war declaration, and it gave the president expansive powers beyond just that war declaration. Essentially, what they did then was declare war on terror, and then everything we say terror applies to what this grants us. So we're just going to fight wars, throughout the Middle East. This is kind of what was the impetus for the drone wars, which, continue to this day, and Obama expanded. It's all wrapped up to, throwing the war powers as the founders envisioned into the trash can, because they were in a world where the British king actually could unilaterally declare war. And now Congress had some power to stop them by refusing to raise funds for them through taxation, but they could declare war unilaterally. We didn't want that kind of system. At least our founders did. Very few of the founders, even in the Philadelphia Convention, wanted that type of system. Like Hamilton did, but he was a total outlier in that regard, and his plan for government was totally ignored. But I digress. Here we are. It's always violated no matter what.
What's being discussed right now in the news is this notion that the president could just join in on the bombing of Iran without a vote of Congress. The Constitution requires Congress to vote. Like, that's our authority, is to declare war.
Yeah, he's totally right about this, and the hypocrisy of both parties shows few times more than when it comes to war powers. You see that he actually got some Democratic co-sponsors on his bill, but not a single Republican one. Why? The Republicans are in power. They're in power in Congress, they're in power in the presidency, and they have the majority of the Supreme Court. But so they're not going to buck the leadership of their own party and control of those branches. So this is a tribalist instinct. But it's not, again, what the founders envisioned and what would be more conducive to liberty. Even if you don't believe in the Constitution or constitutional government, it's better to have different centers of power within governments check the ones that are more impulsive toward war and more likely to go to war, especially when they're influenced by the military-industrial complex and the Israel lobby and all the lobbies that draw us into this madness, and the neocons who still seem to have influence regardless of how they have been defeated electorally. So that's where we're at. Massie's a hero for really standing up on these issues, more so than he does on many other issues, but he really leads in foreign policy in the same way that Ron Paul did and Dennis Kucinich did and some Pat Buchanan and some of the greatest people that were non-interventionists and didn't want us to get into the messes that we are now seeing with our own eyes and feeling in our pocketbooks through inflation and taxation and debt. And this bill would have gone a long way. It's not going to have, any kind of chance of getting through now, especially with the ceasefire involved. But Trump made a constitutional error in that regard, and it's important to call it out. Because guess what's going to happen? A Democrat's going to be elected again someday. The Republicans are going to complain when that Democrat launches an offensive, unprovoked military strike on a different country. And guess what? The Democrats are going to point back to this situation and say, hey, you guys didn't make much of a stink of this when your guy did it. That's exactly what's happened throughout history, and we're just on this tragic cycle of violating, the war declaration process to suit the needs of national lobbies. So what do you think about this? Is Thomas Massie right? What's the biggest problem with the military-industrial complex, and how can it be subdued? Let me know in the comments below. Subscribe to Theo Vaughn. He's awesome. Great podcast. And please like this video, subscribe to this channel, and consider supporting me as a YouTube member or Patreon patron to support the channel. I graciously bow to you if you did that and would be very thankful. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. I'll catch you in the next one.